to get my PhD, and that's where I very first studying bacteria that cause disease or bacterial pathogens. And my very first bacterial pathogen was chlamydia trachomatis. It causes a sexually transmitted disease, but it also causes an eye infection in developing parts of the world where people don't have clean water. Many people don't know this because we don't see it here in the United States, but it's actually the leading cause of preventable blindness in the world. So it's a very serious problem. After I finished my PhD, then I went to Montana and I studied another bacterial pathogen called Francisella tularensis. It causes a disease called tularemia, and we do have that in the United States, but thankfully it's rare. It's also called rabbit fever. Tularemia is a disease like plague. It's really serious. And people who don't get antibiotics, it can kill about 40% of the people who get sick with it. And like Coxiella, you have to work with it in a containment lab to protect yourself from getting the illness. After I finished my work in Montana, that's when I came to Texas and I started learning about Coxiella burnetii, which is, what I'm working on now. Coxiella burnetii causes a disease called Q fever, and a little bit of information was provided to your teacher about it on the sheet that I sent out. But just briefly, Q fever causes a flu-like illness. So when you get it, you get all the symptoms. If you get sick with it, you get all the symptoms of flu. You get a horrible cough, terrible headaches, high fever, chills, aches and pains. It's really very debilitating. Half the people who get sick do end up in the hospital. But fortunately, it is treatable with antibiotics. And even if you don't get antibiotics, most people will eventually get over it, but it'll be 2 really miserable weeks. So most people do get treatment of some kind if they come down with it. Coxiella, on the sheet that I sent out, also, Coxiella is important because it's highly, highly infectious. It only takes 1 or 2 bacteria, well, not 1 or 2. In some cases, 1 bacteria can get a person sick, but definitely less than 10. It's pretty rare for bacterial diseases to be that infectious. It also can be carried by the wind very far distances. 5 kilometers or more, it can spread and still make people sick. And it lives in the dirt for basically ever. If it's in the dirt, it can just stay there. And the wind or animals or people's feet can kick it up, and then it can get you sick. But fortunately, it's not that common in the United States. Now, about 5% of animals, cows, sheep, goats, do carry the disease. But because we don't keep them in close quarters, and the way we manage our animals in the United States, farm workers aren't as at risk as they are in other places, especially in Europe and the Middle East. But the reason we study it is because it can be used as a biological weapon. We don't know that it has actually been used that way, but in times of war, but it can be. And the United States has tested it as a weapon, and also Russia too. They did that as part of a biological weapons program in the 50s and 60s. But I don't believe that the United States has deployed it. What my work and the work of other people in my lab is focused on is understanding how, at the molecular level, Coxiella can make an animal or a person sick. And also, we're working to develop a vaccine for Q fever so that people who are at high risk can be protected. A lot of our soldiers who have gone overseas to Iraq and Afghanistan have contracted Q fever. So we would love to have a vaccine to protect them. So that's kind of the point of the research that I'm doing. What I like most about my work is talking about it. So this is really fun for me. I like talking about it to classrooms. I like talking about it to other scientists. I like teaching students in the classroom here at the graduate and undergraduate level at Texas A&M. And talking to other people about the research you do is actually the most, the second or first, it's most important part of doing science. You can do all the science in the world, but if you don't tell people about the work that you're doing, then you might as well not do it at all. So I really like talking about it and teaching about it. And I also really like learning new things that nobody else has ever known before. That's what doing science in the laboratory can allow you to do, is discover things. And that happens, but not so often. So I can't say it's my favorite part, because I get to talk more often than I get to discover. So I do travel for my work, although I don't do a lot of field work. Most of my travel is to conferences to talk about my science with other scientists and form partnerships so that we can work together and share our tools to find out more about Coxiella and sometimes other bacteria as well. And science, that's a really, really important part of science. Scientists work together. The most successful scientists have a lot of partnerships or collaborations with scientists all over the world. And so I have scientists in my lab that I work with as a team every day. And then I have scientists in Montana, other parts of Texas. Right now I'm doing a project with some scientists in France, and just people all over, and then other scientists just at Texas A&M that aren't part of my lab. So scientists definitely work together as a team. It's critical to solving problems and moving science forward. You know, 2 heads are better than 1, 4 heads are better than 2, 8 heads are better than 4. So we all work together as a team. And then the last question I want to talk about that is skills that I need for my work. So one of the skills I need, obviously, is talking to people. I've just like talking and talking about talking. I need to be able to tell people about science in a way that they understand it with the background knowledge that they already have. And so that's actually a critical skill, and scientists have to practice it all the time. Another critical skill is learning how to maintain cells in a lab so that they can grow in a dish and so that they don't die, and you have to be able to handle them in a sterile way so that you don't contaminate them, which will kill them. So that's something that I do every day too, is I grow cells in a dish and I grow bacteria in tubes and I mix them together and see what happens. I also work a lot with molecules, with just purified DNA or purified RNA or purified proteins that are enzymes that can do reactions in test tubes. So handling those things take their own separate set of techniques, and so I practice those every day too. I also have skills working with mice, and I have some math skills. Math isn't my strong suit, but I do pretty well. And I do a little bit of chemistry. I'm not even as good at chemistry as I am at math, but you know, that's part of working as a team. So I can get together with other scientists who are better at those things than me, and we help each other out. Yeah, so that's a basic summary of what I do. Day to day, I come to my office and I do a little planning. I plan out my day, and I kind of have to do a lot of time management because I like to have multiple experiments running at the same time, and so I have to balance the time that I spend on each of them. So I spend time on planning, and then I just get going in the lab. When I use math, a lot of it is conversions of amounts of chemicals. So if I'm going to treat some cells, say, with a substance to get them to behave a certain way, I have what we call a stock, which is at a certain concentration, but it might be it might be too concentrated for the cells. If I add them at that concentration, the cells will die. So I have to know how to take that amount and dilute it properly so that cells get treated with the right dose. So that kind of math is the math I do most of the time. I also do statistics. I make observations which come in the form of numbers, and then I have to compile them. And I have a lot of software that really helps me do the statistical analysis so I can see what's going on and say, oh, that's occurring at, that's something. I'm measuring a phenomenon. Or I can look at the numbers and say, oh, the thing that I'm seeing is just happening based on chance alone, and so it's not a real phenomenon. So I use statistics, and I do a lot of math day to day, just calculating concentrations of different substances. Hold on, I missed how do I grow bacteria? So the bacteria I grow in broth. So we make a special medium that's like, we call it broth. It's just a liquid that has a lot of nutrients in it, like proteins and carbohydrates, amino acids, and salts, things that bacteria need to eat to grow. And we just take a little bit of bacteria and we dunk them in that broth, and then we put them at body temperature. And usually the next morning I can come in and that broth, which used to be just clear like water, is now cloudy and full of bacteria. And then I can use those bacteria to do my experiments. Coxiella is different from that. So if I'm working with Coxiella, I have to grow it for 7 days in order for the broth to get cloudy. And it actually grows in a low oxygen environment. So I have to have it in a very special incubator that only has 2.5% oxygen. The air we breathe every day actually has about 20% oxygen in it. So these incubators are very special, and they're designed to help Coxiella grow. But yeah, that's how I grow bacteria. And the protective equipment. So when I work with Coxiella, the infectious kind that could cause Q fever, I do have to wear protective equipment so that I don't get the disease myself. What I wear is I wear a hair bonnet, kind of like what a lunch lady would wear to keep the bacteria out of my hair. I wear 2 wraparound gowns like a surgeon might wear. I wear 2 pairs of gloves so that if one pair gets dirty, I can take it off, and there will be another glove underneath to protect my hand, so it's not just bare in the lab. I wear booties on my feet, just like a surgeon would wear in an operating room, and I wear a mask. But this mask is special. So surgeons wear surgical masks, which will stop like spit from getting on their patient. But the masks I wear are called N95 respirators, and they fit really tight around your mouth and nose, and you can only breathe through them. Air cannot get in through the sides, and that keeps the bacteria out of the air that you're breathing. It's like a filter. So that's my last line of defense from getting Coxiella. If it gets on my skin, I can wash it off. But if it gets in my lungs, I'm in trouble. So the respirator, I absolutely need to wear. But I also never have Coxiella open to the air. I always have it in a cabinet. So that puts another barrier between me and the bacteria to protect me. The disease that Coxiella causes is called Q fever, because when they first described the disease, they didn't know what caused it. They saw people getting sick, and they had a very specific type of symptoms, but they didn't know. They knew it wasn't flu, but they didn't know what caused it. And so Q was short for query, which it was first discovered in Australia at slaughterhouses. People who worked with those animals were getting sick. And in Australia, they use the word query a lot for like question. So it's kind of like a mystery fever or a query fever. Eventually, they did find out, obviously, that Coxiella causes it, but because scientists are like, they don't change things if they don't have to. They just kept calling it Q fever, even though we know what causes it. Some people have called it cocciellosis, but that doesn't kind of roll off the tongue as nicely as Q fever, so we just stick with that. Okay. Yes, so Q fever is mostly when most human cases of Q fever are caused by breathing in contaminated air that has the bacteria in it. And it gets in the air when animals who are sick with Q fever soil the dirt with the bacteria. So they can pass it through feces, but most of the time it gets in the dirt because animals who have Coxiella get a very different disease from people. They don't cough and get like a flu. Instead, it infects pregnant animals, and it causes them to have stillborn calves or kids. So when they have those spontaneous abortions and the animal is delivered, and all of the placenta, the afterbirth, gets in the dirt. And that's how the bacteria get in the dirt. And then the animals walk around and they kick it up. Or people walk around in the dirt and they kick it up. And then the wind can just spread it everywhere. So the biggest outbreak that has ever occurred of Q fever happened in the Netherlands, and it actually occurred over a 3-year period from 2007 to 2010. And during that time, people who were living just their daily lives, running errands, going to school, whatever, but lived within about a 5-kilometer radius of the farms where the Q fever was, or the Coxiella was pinpointed to, they were catching it and getting sick. So about 5 kilometers is about the radius, maybe a little bit further, where the wind can carry it, because Coxiella is very, very small. And so it can just waft. You can also get Coxiella from a tick bite, but that's pretty rare. More often people get it by inhaling it. Is there a specific geographic reason that Q fever exists? Q fever is globally distributed, so you can find it just about anywhere except for maybe on like really isolated islands. So supposedly there's no Q fever on New Zealand, and I just recently went to Hawaii and they don't have it there either, but that's just because the animals that carry it don't live on those islands. But it is here in the United States, and it has been found in animals, and it has been found in ticks. The reason we don't it's considered a rare disease is, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is because people and animals don't live together in the tight spaces that allow it to be spread around, and maintained at a high level. So we have that advantage here in the United States. In places like the Netherlands, goats are really susceptible to Q fever, and they love their goat cheese and goat milk. And so when they farm their goats, they keep them really close together at high densities at these farms. And so it's easy for the disease to spread animal to animal and then from animals to people. And the other thing that keeps Coxiella as kind of a rare disease is the fact that it's probably underreported. So people get it, and if it's about half the people who get sick, it's serious enough for them to go to the hospital. And when they're in the hospital, the doctors go through a series of tests eliminating like flu or other forms of pneumonia, things like that. And then finally they get to Q fever at the end, they give them the right antibiotics, and they get better. The other half of people who get sick don't get sick so bad that they go to the hospital, and they just stay at home, and they get over it eventually. It's miserable, but they get over it. So those cases don't really get reported. And then I should say that only about half the people who get exposed to Coxiella actually get sick in the first place. So the people who do get sick have it really bad, but about half the people who get the organism don't get sick at all. So we think it's rare, but it's probably more common than we think it is. Okay, so Ms. Owens asked if the ticks get the bacteria from an animal and then transmit it to humans, or if ticks just kind of pick it up somehow from the environment because it's in the dirt, maybe. We don't know the answer to that. That's an excellent question. There aren't very many people in the world who are studying the relationship between ticks and Coxiella. We have some ideas. Yes, it could be in the dirt, just like out in the woods. But if that were the case, we would think that more people would be getting it just from being outside. So we think that ticks have it, and they get it from animals, and they pass it animal to animal. And so the animals we have in the farmyard, maybe a long time ago, some of them got bitten by a tick carrying Coxiella, and then they brought the disease to the farm, and then they started spreading it amongst themselves. And so that established the infection in sheep, goats, and cows. But we don't really know how Coxiella is maintained in the environment, but we think ticks are an important part of it, and it might be that Coxiella just lives in ticks all the time, and that ticks pass it to animals. We're not sure. That's a really interesting question, actually. Another thing I didn't address is that Q fever doesn't pass person to person. So even if you get it, you're probably not going to cough it up and give it to your neighbor or even your family members. Because of the way it grows inside your body, it doesn't grow in between the cells, it grows inside them. And when you cough, you don't cough those cells up. So fortunately, even if I were to get sick in the lab, which I'm not afraid I will do because we have so many good procedures in place to protect ourselves, I'm not going to bring it home. So that's good. And that's another reason why it's not very common among people. I guess we're getting close to the end of the session. Does anyone have any other questions before we go? Okay. Well, I hope you guys learned a little bit and enjoyed. I had a good time talking about Coxiella. Um, have a great day. Good morning. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. Goodbye.